Welcome back, Masters of the Universe Classics historians, fans, toy buyers, or, maybe people who just stumble on this YouTube channel accidentally because you're looking for puppy videos. This is Scott ToyGuru Neitlich. I was the brand manager for Masters of the Universe Classics, and today we are talking about Count Marzo in our continuing director's commentary. So, who is Count Marzo. See, I almost gave him an upgrade there. This is Count Marzo. Well, actually, this was his design sheet from Filmation. And this is what he looked like in Filmation. Remember that 80s show that, this whole franchise kind of took off because of? Count Marzo was a reoccurring villain in the Filmation series. He was in a couple episodes, like, Once and Future Duke, Turning a Flower, Search for a Son, with a Mechanic son, I think, if memory recalls. And, he was kind of a badass sorcerer wizard that sort of looked like the Count of Monte Cristo and, had that awesome Renaissance thing going for him. And he was cool because he was reoccurring. Fast forward to the 2000X series, and he got a redesign, but kind of maintained a lot of that sorcerer, evil wizard vibe that had started with Filmation, but he was a little bit more, I guess, cast as more powerful. He was also reoccurring. He was in a ton of episodes. I'm not even going to start to, list them because I probably list about 10 episodes. But he, not only was he a reoccurring villain, but he really became a powerful force. In fact, he was like the arch enemy of Miro and Keldor and Randor in the Great Unrest. He had attacked the Hall of Wisdom. Now, we were very eager in the Masters of the Universe Classics line to get to 2000X characters. 2010 was the year that we started to finally get to those. And Marzo was the very first lucky contender to go from 2000X to Classics. Now, there were a few strings with getting 2000X characters, and that needs a little context. So, the vintage line, ending with this mini-comic, and ending with unreleased plans for the Power of Grayskull until, of course, Super 7 actually released the figures, which is awesome. Well, while this brand was a powerhouse at Mattel, even outselling Barbie and Hot Wheels, it kind of ended with a whimper. It basically went out very quickly for various reasons because product was basically overshipped, or at least main characters weren't shipped enough. And then what was really kind of supposed to save the brand was the 87 movie, the Gary Goddard film with Dolph Lundgren, not the Muppet character. That's funny. And the Courtney Cox. I'm going to stop talking about that now. But the point is the movie underperformed. And then New Adventures comes along, and it also underperformed so bad that they were basically giving away extra figures for free because they had so much overstock that they were, creating cards that could hold 2 figures but only charging you for 1. This line, was also basically considered a failure, except for this SKU, the He-Man Power Sword. It was like one of Mattel's best-selling items that year. So, even though the rest of the New Adventures line was kind of in the bottom 10, that was like in the top 3. And then fast forward to 2000X, it was also more or less considered a failure because, kind of stopped mid-run. The show, suddenly, stopped and the figure line stopped. There's a lot of reasons for that, overshipping main characters, not giving the show a good time slot, having too many variants of He-Man in the line. You could point to a lot of reasons, and that's not what we're here to discuss. But the point is the culmination of all of that, quote-unquote, historical failure had more or less left a bad taste in the mouth of quite a few Mattel executives who, were around during the 2000X era and were still around during the launch of MOTU Classics. So this kind of amalgam of failure of the brand made a lot of executives a little nervous that we wanted to play with 2000X characters in Classics. But, I made the case that a lot of these characters were based on Filmation, and they had, they're very historical. And the green light we got was that we could do them, but we had to really steer away from the 2000X interpretation with all the extra armor and spikes and flapping capes and, giant power blasts and, the things that aesthetically made 2000X what it made. And so the compromise was, okay, well, if we use the basic buck and we just design, new armor, new capes, it will keep them looking like classics figures, but we could do the 2000X characters. And that was kind of the bargain and the way we were able to include 2000X characters. As long as we didn't make them, look in that 2000X style, that was very clear. And, it was okay if we mentioned this stuff in the bio, and we weren't even allowed to put 2000X art in the bio shield. But what was really more important was that in the sculpt that the Horseman did, we had to stay away from, all those extra spikes and all that, what I call the hyper anime detail. And when Marzo's sculpt came back, he did get some pushback from management with his kind of windswept hair, because they considered that kind of part of the 2000X aesthetic, that all the characters had hair that was flying all over the place and, kind of influenced by obviously, Spawn figures and, again, what I called the hyper anime details. And upper management basically wanted us to give him a haircut and find a way to get rid of the flowing hair, but based on the timeline, we couldn't do that. So essentially they let us go forward with the hair as is, being windblown, with the condition that they're like, okay, but no more of this. It was very clear, you are not to have windblown hair anymore. So we were like, absolutely, no problem. We'll make that very clear, to the whole team, to the 4 horsemen. And so that's why Marzo looks a little bit more 2000X-y than other characters, as opposed to his old Filmation look where he just had flat black hair that was in that, page boy look that Prince Adam also had. One cool thing about Marzo, hairstyle aside, that almost had to get a trim, he had one of my favorite accessories of the whole line. I loved his amulet. I loved that the Horseman figured out a way for it to attach into the back of his belt. I don't know, it was so much fun to sort of finally have a magical object in the line, a magical object that in the show kind of almost had a life of its own. He could call it to him from far away and all sorts of stuff. Now, another aspect of Marzo was that he had a sort of a smaller, uglier man form, I guess, for lack of a better word. And fans definitely wanted to see that form and wondered why he couldn't just be a pack-in with Marzo. And essentially, he was too big. He was too small to be a figure of his own, but too big to just be a pack-in. He kind of hit that Orko category. So I guess we could have done him as a deluxe figure, but for the moment, Marzo was slotted as a monthly figure, which meant we weren't going to be able to do, his ugly man form. But it was definitely on the list, as was doing the Filmation look. The Filmation look was so different from the 2000X costume that we definitely talked about doing, once we got Filmation rights, being able to do Marzo, much like we did, 2 versions of Evil Seed. We did both the Filmation look and the 2000X look, because you can see they were different enough that you can't get away with just one figure for both of them. So that was definitely the long-term plan for Marzo, but, obviously the line dwindled down after I left Mattel, so we never kind of got to that. One last point about Marzo is getting to a 2000X figure and showing how a 2000X figure would look in the line, I think finally put an end to the fan requests for us to do 2000X figures in classics. So, for example, this Hordak Staction figure that was put out, at the time of 2000X or right after, when we translated that into classics, we kept some things like the staff, but you could see the longer ears, the extra spikes, those are all gone. And Marzo, I think, helped illustrate how the Horsemen and Mattel were going to be able to translate a truly 2000X character like Marzo into classics and how that was going to work. So, he came out really great, and he fit with the rest of the line. His hair was a little windswept, but basically because of timing, we just couldn't resculpt the hair. And we got a very stern note basically saying, okay, no more of this. You've got to steer away from 2000X aesthetics and keep it classics. And we did. And classics would continue for many years.